It is truly my pleasure to reintroduce you to Dr. Robert Schneider. Dr. Schneider is an internationally known physician, scientist, and educator, and a leader in evidence-based medicine. For the past 30 years, he has directed or co-directed more than $25 million worth of research sponsored by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, and other federal agencies that sponsor research on mind-body medicine, aging, and cardiovascular disease. The results of this research has been published in over 175 peer-reviewed articles in journals and abstracts. Dr. Schneider is currently professor and dean of the College of Integrative Medicine and the director of the federally sponsored Institute for Natural Medicine and Prevention at Maharishi University of Management. Furthermore, he is the medical director of the award-winning Raj Ayurvedic Health Center in Iowa, and as such has unique perspectives that gives him insights on our modern healthcare system of health, of the ancient and traditional medical system of Ayurveda, all of which really brings to bear well to this discussion, and I'm sure you will all very much enjoy this discussion on the importance of connectivity for health and immunity. So without further ado, Robert.
Yes. All right. But now I'd like to talk about the power of connection and the loss of connection, which we just experienced a moment ago technologically. But on a deeper level, I'd like to talk about how to transform your immunity and health through the process of restoration of connection from the point of view of the frontiers of modern medicine and discoveries of ancient medicine from Ayurveda and yoga. Modern medicine's been talking about this as deaths of despair, as an era of deaths of despair due to loss of connection with our inner selves. There was a report in the Wellbeing Trust just about a month ago in accordance or in association with the Academy of Family Practitioners that discussed how the epidemic within the epidemic relates to COVID-19 having an unprecedented impact on our world, which we all experience. And along with tens of thousands of deaths in the US, COVID overlays the growing epidemic of deaths of despair. A preventable surge of avoidable deaths, according to the Wellbeing Trust and American Academy of Family Practitioners, from mental health is ahead of us if the country does not begin to invest in solutions that can help heal the nation's isolation, pain, and suffering due to loss of connection. Two surveys published just last month of healthcare providers and the general population reported that 25% of healthcare providers, like us, and the general population are depressed. 28% of the US population and frontline providers report symptoms of anxiety. 35% aren't sleeping well at night. And more than a quarter report acute stress symptoms, and probably more. That's the age of depression, according to JAMA Psychiatry, published at the beginning of this pandemic in March 2019. Now, this despair and mental distress has major physical implications. Here's a study published in the JAMA Network just a week or two ago showing the relationship between perceived stress and mortality. The top line shows people reporting low levels of stress and their survival rate. The green line shows people reporting high levels of stress over 4 years' time and their survival rate. Substantially lower survival, that means increased death rate, amongst people who report higher states of despair. I think Eyewitness News got it right The coronavirus, the stress it causes, and your immune system are all totally relevant for this time. Because the relationship between the brain and perceived stress and the immune system and our cells are mapped out very well now by modern scientists. At the top of this diagram, for those of you who are not physicians in the audience, it shows the relationship between the brain and stress and firing of the sympathetic nervous system and the neurohormones associated with stress like cortisol and others, affecting the immune system in the middle of this diagram, dysregulating the immune cells, disimpairing or impairing the immune cells, and reducing immune effectiveness. And this in turn affects the cells in our body. The lower side of this diagram, you see cellular senescence, which is a technical word, means cell death. So the brain and stress translates into impairing the immune system, and that translates into impaired disease cells and cell mortality. So that's the mind-body connection, totally relevant to our time today and preventing the current health crisis and rising above it to higher states of health, which is the theme of our webinar today. How are we going to do that? Let's look to the frontier of modern medicine, which is called systems medicine. This systems medicine looks at the networks within our body and their interrelationships. On the upper right of this diagram, you see the network of society, of community. Dr. Guarneri talked about planetary health and planetary consciousness. That's a network. And within that are individuals. And each individual is made up of a series of networks. There's a network of the organs, and then the organ systems, and then the cells, and then the DNA, which is itself a network of molecules. But there's even a more profound level in the human system. And that I'd like to show you in this illustration. On the left-hand side, we see an expanded view from modern systems medicine. Beginning at the top, we see planetary health, actually the health of the whole ecosystem that we're connected with in the universe, and then society, and then an individual within society. Individual is made up of organ systems, organs like the heart and others, tissues, cells, macromolecules, and then proteins, RNA, and DNA. But what makes up DNA is at the end of the story. No, our quantum physics friends tell us that DNA is made up of the laws of biochemistry. Our biologist friends tell us that the laws of biochemistry are made up of the laws of chemistry. The laws of chemistry are made up of laws of physics. And then our quantum physics friends tell us that physics is ultimately described by the field of quantum physics, which describes matter fields and energy fields, electromagnetism, light, and then protons, neutrons, and electrons. And every day it seems like there's a new subatomic particle or field proposed or discovered. But these fundamental basic quantum fields of nature, according to Einstein and contemporary quantum physicists, have their basis in a single unified field of all the laws of physics, at the basis of all the laws of chemistry, at the basics of all the laws of biology and physiology. Therefore, the human system has its ground state in this unified field described by modern science, its micro state in that singularity, that unified state, and its macro state in the universe. That's the network of networks. And you know what? The most ancient health sciences of Ayurveda and yoga describe something very similar. They describe how human beings are a microcosm representing the whole macrocosm and have the whole basis, the intelligence of physiology and actually intelligence of the universe deep within themselves. On the right-hand side of this chart, you see that illustrated and how Ayurveda and yoga describe how one can use technologies for health at each of these different levels, at the macro level, at the physiological level, at the quantum mechanical level, and ultimately there are technologies to operate on the level of the unified field, the basis, the inner intelligence of the body. Dr. Nader was talking about enlivening the inner intelligence of the body with these Ayurvedic technologies, meditation, particularly transcendental meditation, transcending to that innermost level, is one of those technologies to restore balance. And there are many others also. This is a summary of that perspective, the 4 domains of total health. This is a seminar on integrative medicine, on holistic medicine. From the Ayurvedic and the modern systems medicine point of view, you've got to consider the environment. Dr. Guarneri was highlighting that exceptionally. You've got to consider the body. We've been doing that for a long time, although on a gross level or on a level, need to go further on that one. Got to consider the mind. And now we have to consider what's been largely missing from most modern understandings of medicine, traditional and contemporary, is the inner intelligence of the body, the inner self. In the spiritual traditions, this is called the self or cosmic self or the intelligence of the universe. In the language of modern physicists like Dr. John Hagelin and others, this is the unified field at our basis. These are the 4 domains, and I call this the connectome. We have the genome, which is the system of all of our genes and all of our DNA. We have the microbiome, which is the system of all the microorganisms in our body, which are more than the cells in our body. But now we have the connectome, which is the system of systems that connects all levels, all the networks that comprise our health. And we have to consider our connectome, connect with all these levels to have total health, is the main point of this convergence of the most modern medicines and the most ancient medicines. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, if we look at JAMA Psychiatry from just a couple of weeks ago, psychosocial interventions and immune system function. This article is a meta-analysis of dozens or 100 studies on various psychosocial stress-reducing interventions and concluding that psychosocial interventions are reliably associated with enhanced immune function. Well, we know the theory of that now, the model that we just reviewed a few minutes ago, and therefore may represent a viable strategy for improving immune-related health. There are many psychosocial interventions for reducing stress. I'd like to highlight a comparative effectiveness study that was recently completed and published in Lancet Psychiatry that was funded by the Department of Defense and US Army, who wanted to find out what psychosocial stress-reducing interventions would be effective in US war veterans, in this case in the San Diego VA hospital, because war veterans have a high level of PTSD, but don't we know now, a year or two after this study was published, that almost everyone seems to be suffering these days from some level of post-traumatic stress. In this study, veterans were, my colleagues and I randomly assigned veterans to 3 groups: to meditation with transcendental meditation, to cognitive behavior therapy, which with the best known therapy for PTSD called prolonged exposure, CBT, and control. And on the left-hand side of this diagram, you see the first 2 groups, meditation and CBT, had similar results on the primary outcome of reducing post-traumatic stress. Control and attention education control had very little effect. In the center part of this diagram, we're looking at a secondary outcome of self-reported stress symptoms. And in this aspect of the study, the meditation was actually more effective, modestly more effective. than the cognitive behavioral therapy. And then on depression, we saw the same sequence of results: meditation and cognitive behavior therapy and education. And this meditation is a technique for remembering oneself, for reconnecting with one's own inner self, restoring one's mental experience, one's conscious experience to that innermost level of consciousness. And that connection was a very effective method for reducing PTSD. This next study is 700 subjects who are participating in a multimodality Ayurvedic and meditation intervention. These subjects were practicing meditation twice a day. They were consuming an Ayurvedic diet, largely plant-based, according to their mind-body type and their current situation, practicing yoga asanas, taking Ayurvedic herbal supplements to boost their immunity, health, and well-being. And we're following, on average, very much an ideal daily routine according to circadian rhythms, including the sleep cycle. These 700 subjects were compared over 4 years to several 100,000 controls and norms for their region. This is from health insurance statistics from that were gathered from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I want to zoom in the areas that are circled. Respiratory diseases were about 80% reduced in the Ayurvedic healthy lifestyle group compared to controls. And infectious diseases, hospitalizations for infectious diseases in the second row, that circle, were about 90% reduced. This was done several years ago, but we would imagine very relevant to today's healthcare crisis, managing their lifestyle. In conclusion, I'd like to say that connection is the key theme that I'd like you to take away tonight. To transform your community and your health. And the Connect Om is your innermost self, your mind, body, and environment. And if we can restore balance on each of those levels and the relationship between each of those levels, then we've got total health. And the data shows that practicing the practical technologies to restore balance on each of those levels, and therefore in the wholeness of health, meditation, healthy diet, yoga exercise, herbal supplements, daily routine, are all practical technologies. We'll hear a lot more about those in later parts of the webinar. But I have to say, I'm here at Maharishi International University. I teach doctors, the graduate students, the PhD students, and the undergraduate students. We have a rich body of resources here, and anyone could take advantage of these programs. As physicians, for self-care, so important, and for your patients and everyone listening tonight. So yours for total health, and back to you, Suzanne.